What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast where we can listen to trans and gender non-binary voices telling us their story in their voice, reminding us that each of us is not alone.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Not Alone. I am here with the famous Kato. I'm gonna let Kato introduce himself, but before we get started, I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the fact that it's Pride Month. It's actually a really interesting time. I'm not gonna get into the politics of it, but it's a interesting time overall. And I'm gonna let Kato talk a little bit about the importance of this conversation that we're having, and the importance of knowing that you're represented. And we'll kind of continue the conversation from there. But Kato, tell us more about who you are and everything.
Yeah, I always appreciate the introductions. Yeah, Kato Lujan Camacho. My pronouns are he and him. And I guess it's just like, yeah, I'm a transgender person. I am a gay man as well. And I think it's very significant that you mention, we are in Pride Month right now. And I know that I'm not alone in this, but this year feels a little different because this is the first time. Obviously I've seen it every year, but this is the first time that I'm seeing a huge number of queer folks kind of being like, what are we doing here? Like, where is the representation? Where is the safety? Where is everything that we've been fighting for all of these years? And so Pride feels really different this year in that my husband and I aren't planning on going to any Pride celebrations. We don't have any Pride activities planned, anything like that, mostly because we don't feel like we're in a space where it's safe to do so. And a lot of that comes down to the same things that we've been talking about this whole time, where, just the mere act of existing as queer people right now is very radical. Obviously not actually. I mean, we're just human beings trying to live our lives, but we are occupying a time where pride is such a difficult thing to approach, between both really wanting to celebrate and uplift everything and be that representation that we said we needed, and also just protecting our own peace and being aware that things are pretty complicated.
And speaking of complicated, Kato, one of the things we've spoken a lot about your journey so far, and it's been amazing. So thank you for sharing it. But we're hoping to talk a little bit about some of the harder things that people don't want to talk about because they feel like it doesn't it's not something people are often proud of, except it's reality. um you can you talk a little bit about your journey in the context of exploring and discovering things like homelessness and how you battle that and what that experience was like?
Yeah, of course. So the first time that I was ever homeless, I was, I believe, 16 years old. I had ran away from home as a teenager, and at that point, I hadn't necessarily identified any reason why. It was just like, I just don't want to be at home anymore. I want to be out and I want to be having these experiences. And like many teenagers who dive headlong into things, the world isn't a rom-com where everything falls into place kind of perfectly. So I spent from the ages of like 15, 16, all the way up to about 18 in Seattle, intermittently homeless, either street-based, which means living out on the street, in a tent, in a car, however, or sheltered in a emergency shelter, couch surfing, things like that. But I was transient during that whole period there. And we touched on previously that was where I realized, in order for people like me, at that point, not knowing what people like me meant, in order for folks like us to survive and thrive in these environments that are really hostile and really inhospitable to us, you need to be adaptable. And you offered the term code switching, which is something we've heard a lot from the Black community in reference to having to perform whiteness in order to fit into different areas that aren't made for them. And I think another term that we hear more often now is like masking for autistic folks who are trying to integrate and navigate neurotypical society. So I'm trying to figure out what the word is when it comes to queer and trans folks, but there was a lot of that there. That's when I learned that, okay, presenting my gender in this way draws more attention to me, or performing these things that are related typically to this gender moves the target off my back, or it ingratiates me with these people, or it does these different things. And that's probably the first time there that I realized gender is something that I have a lot more control over than we're kind of communicated, wherein I can impact this and edit this and adjust this as needed to make myself feel safe, to make myself feel seen, and also to do the exact opposite and blend seamlessly into spaces that I don't feel comfortable in.
That opens up so many different thoughts. I want to start by that first initial. Do you remember when you started realizing that people responded to you differently based on what gender you were?
Oh,
Could
yeah,
you talk about that?
absolutely. Yeah, I think the first simplest way to most people explore gender is like clothing. We think about clothes. That's a super easy entryway because anybody can go to a store, grab something, put it on their body, and be having a different experience now. And that was the same for me. I'm in my late teens, early 20s at this point. I'm occupying a body that is perceived feminine by the world around me. And when I tamped that down, when I was wearing loose clothing that are typically in masculine styles, things like that, the way that people approached me was much different. There was more, not to say an equal footing, because there's still so much misogyny wrapped up in everything, but there wasn't that immediate pull that identified me as feminine and brought all those preconceived notions that people have to the table. In contrast, if I'm there, I can think of one time wearing this, it was a light white kind of sheer blouse with flowers on. I remember it because I really loved the blouse and this long flowing skirt. And I was going to meet, oh,
There you go.
we have one of our guests. There you go. Um, I was headed to meet some friends outside of a venue that plays heavy metal music, something that I've been into for a long time. But I'm dressed in this outfit. It's very, very high feminine, very, very kind of that classic look. And I remember entering into this room full of people who were bigger than me, leather and spikes and tattoos and everything everywhere. And immediately everyone's gaze was there. And there was kind of two schools of thoughts, which is this hyper femininity does not belong here, and I'm going to actively make this an unsafe space for you. Or the inverse of this hyper femininity represents in my brain someone who needs to be protected and someone who is sexually available and someone who is all of these different things that I conceive femininity to be. And so I had those two images happening all at one time in that one space. And I went, okay, this is where how I want to dress and how I feel like I want to present, hello, may not always be appropriate for the situation, or it is appropriate, but the other people here are not living in the same reality that I am. And they're not ready to make a space that's safe for people if they don't fit into their understanding of how people should look, behave, or act. And I think that is an experience that anyone who has identified as, presented as, or experienced life as a woman at any point has experienced the understanding that, like, I really wanted to wear this skirt today because this skirt makes me feel good. And I've just entered into a room where having this skirt on feels like everyone in here sees me as a slab of meat at the market. And that's something that when I'm presenting more masculinely, or now, I no longer feel that. I mean, outside of the occasional gaze at the club or something like that. But that was somewhere in that moment presenting so feminine where I went, I need to figure out how to still feel good while still feeling safe, because the two are not always going to overlap. There's another one.
That's all good. So that's really interesting, right? This idea that, and I find it interesting because it is so normalized to you. You're like, well, of course that's reality.
And that is the part that, and we touched on that a little bit. Now I have to tell people that I am trans coming into spaces because people do not assume that I'm trans. And so I am observing these different things, and I didn't realize how deeply internalized the hypervigilance and hyper awareness is associated with femininity and womanhood in general. It is so deeply ingrained in my brain that still now, years away from anyone perceiving me as a woman or feminine or any way, I still perceive gaze around me and watch and remain hyper vigilant for all of these different little social factors that determine if I'm safe or not, even though they no longer apply to me in that traditional sense. So it's so normalized, and it's honestly really horrific when you think about the fact that we have around 50% of the population who is conditioned to walk around constantly perceiving threats.
So I want to explore that word threats, because I find that fascinating. This idea that you're constantly under threat. So the closest I've ever, so I'm 6'2", I'm 280 at this point. I'm a big person. I'm usually seen as the threat. I'm not usually seen as the threatened. But the closest I ever felt to that was a few years ago. I was traveling through South America, and I'd always been told that, oh, be careful where you go and what you do. And for the first time in my life, I felt paralyzed by it. I felt this idea that if I step somewhere that I shouldn't be, people will look at me different, people will prey on me. And I remember being actively paralyzed by the lack, like what I couldn't do. And I realized after one night, like, you can't exist like this. This is silly. I don't think that's the same experience, because first of all, one is chronic, one is acute, one is a realization, one is sort of coming to it. But I've this idea for those people who've never experienced femininity. So we're hoping that a lot of the people who listen in are actually people who are looking to not be alone. But hopefully also people who listen are people going, I wonder what that experience is like. And for those people who are listening and going, I'm wondering what their experience is like, and they were born male, in those cases, this is not an experience you're ever going to feel. So I want to talk a little bit about that individualized experience of you realizing that, yes, it is a huge burden on your back to realize that you could be constantly threatened. How do you, first of all, cope with this idea that your mere presence is now something that you need to, it's now a tool, honestly. Sometimes it's a tool that, if inappropriately seen, is threatening, but in the right area, you could weaponize it.
Oh yeah. And this is an experience that I think with cisgender folks, maybe they are less attuned to seeing it. Cisgender women, I know a lot of cisgender women who still talk about it, but cis men and even folks who have been socialized masculine who transition later on, sometimes the perception isn't there. That, like, for reference, I am like 5'4" on a good day. Like, so I've always been pretty small and everything, but there is something to that. I want to briefly talk about there was a scene from a movie called Fresh, and it's a woman and she's walking down the road by herself. It's dark. She's taking a shortcut through this alley, and down the way, she sees the outline, the silhouette of a man walking towards her quite quickly. And she turns and starts walking a little bit faster away from him. And then he's catching up to her, and you hear her heart pounding, and she's breathing heavy, and she's panicking, thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is going to be violent towards me. And then the guy comes into the streetlight, and it's just a guy out walking with his baby. And she goes, oh, I'm so stupid. But later in that movie, the same thing happens again, and she does get grabbed by somebody. And it's just this idea of when you are someone who is considered less than in the social paradigm, whether you're a trans person, whether you are a trans or cisgender woman, if you are any of these things, there is that conditioning to both, I need to constantly be hyper vigilant, and also, oh my gosh, I'm being so dumb. Why? Of course that person wasn't a threat. Of course I'm safe. Of course this. But then, oh, you let your guard down and got something terrible happened. Who knows? Why weren't you paying more attention? So there's a constant reinforcement on both sides that don't perceive all men as a threat. But why were you out with that man? These kind of things are a constant push and pull. And those extend into the trans experience. I mean, now I'm hypervigilant, unlearning that perceived threat associated with femininity, and now going, are people going to see me as not masculine enough? Because I still, when I'm out in public with my husband, we still look like two gay men. And now I'm there. I'm like, okay, can we hold our hands walking down the road here? Or is someone going to see that and take umbrage with that? I'm less frightened for my individual self now, but I am still absolutely in that place where, I mean, to try to frame it, like, imagine being an actor and no one gives you the script and everyone is watching, waiting for you to say the wrong word. That's, I think, if I could summarize what it is to be in an experience where you're expected to perform something, you don't know the script, but everybody else knows when you've made a mistake. And that's what you are conditioned to look for.
It reminds me, so it reminds me of this idea that they say that the world is, when do you become an adult? You become an adult when you realize no one else knows what they're doing as well. And this idea that I'm gonna grow up and I will suddenly know everything, and you realize no one knows anything. Do you think that there is, and I'm genuinely asking this question because it's a fascinating idea to me, do you think there's a point at which you realize that you grow to a point where you realize there is no script, they can't look? And I genuinely don't know the answer to this question. They aren't looking because they are planning something, but because you're just in the field of view and your presence elicits a reaction, but it's not necessarily more contemplative than I saw you. I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, I think when it comes to gender specifically, and let me talk hyper local, in the culture that I grew up here in Western Washington, as someone who lived the first 25 years of their life as a woman, there is a script. We have a script reinforced to us every day by billboards of women's bodies, by how we're supposed to be on television, by commercials, by music, by the clothes that are available when we go to the store. We have an unspoken script reinforced every single day. All the way back to, I can think when my mom would point at a woman in the store and go, I can't believe she's wearing that. I can't believe she came out of the house looking like that. When my dad would make a joke with his friends, like, oh, or I didn't know you were, wearing the skirt in the house now. Things like that. All of those are the script. And just like a script, they're just as artificial. They're just as baseless and non-existent. But culturally, in these small pockets, the people who ascribe to them, that's gospel. That's like someone taking Shakespeare and adapting. It's like, what are you doing? You're messing with what we have established is right. And that is what I think I became more hyper aware of as I moved into situations where I went, oh, this script is different. In this little subculture, in this subset, in this niche, they're working off a different script. And these people over here, we're all in the same big play, but we're playing different roles. We're playing different things, and learning to move between those. Code switching, masking, all of those different terms come to mind. But I will say that when it comes to gender in the binary, in Western American culture, I really feel like we do have a script. It's just at the end of the day, we're all getting a little bit of a different version because it's the one passed down to us by our parents. It's one passed to us through media, everything else. So the fact is, we will never be able to perform exactly as someone else is reading, but we are still able to pass judgment based on the one that we have. And that's where a lot of us are operating from.
And I really thought we'd get into homelessness, but this is such a fascinating conversation. So I apologize that I'm focusing on this, but I find that our conversations always do this. We start with one goal and then we hyper focus into this other little niche. So what we've been talking a little bit about your experience formerly as a woman. Now as a guy, I'm curious what your takeaway is. And what I'm referring to is one of the things people talk about is this idea that you've got a bowl of M&Ms. One of them is poisonous. Should you treat all of them the same way? Is it right looking at all men as predators because you can't tell which one isn't? What is your take now being on the other side of the coin?
Yeah, that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, because even as someone who grew up socialized as a woman, it took me now being in the position that I am to realize how much misogyny I had internalized. Like the way that I'm doing things and the way that I move, I go, am I looking at the women around me, someone who in a different situation I could be a peer with right now? And am I seeing myself as more capable than them? Am I seeing myself as more physically capable? I'm not more physically capable than them. Am I seeing myself as more informed than them? A big one for me is, I think we talked about this before, as a woman, you're taught, speak over people, speak up, because people are going to talk over you all the time. And now I'm like, am I forcing my voice over people? Am I doing things like this? And I catch myself doing it where when I'm in a room or meeting a woman who I know how I look when I'm out in public. I got big piercings, tattoos, all of that. And I'll see someone and I'm like, okay, let's queer it up a little bit. Let's raise my voice a tone. Let's change my mannerisms. Let's open my body language a bit so that she knows, I'm articulating the behaviors, sounds, and actions that made me feel safe. And let me do that for her now. And it took, like I said, getting here to realize this. And now looking back, I talk with my husband pretty often. And this is a pretty sweeping statement, but just looking at media and meme culture and everything else that we have about how cisgender men treat cisgender women and trans women as well. The other day I looked over at him and I said, I think straight men hate women.
Interesting.
And I was expecting him to be shocked, but he went, oh yeah, no, absolutely. Because all of our socialization, at least here in my little microcosm of this world, is that women are beings with a utility and men are beings with a purpose. And go ahead, please.
I generally never try to put my view into our conversation. I'm going to disagree with you on that
Okay.
front. And that's okay. We're both allowed to disagree for sure. But I have never once, at least not that I know of, and I'm going to be introspective after this conversation to find out more, but I have never thought of a woman having a utility um, or a purpose. I feel like we're all sort of existing on a floating rock in space. Most of us going, "What the hell am I doing here?" But this, and I guess it worries me a little bit. This idea that that women see themselves as seen in a way that they have only a utility, and what that to me feels very disempowering, and as a result, I wonder if it creates a reaction that is disempowering, where you try to empower yourself more actively, and I'm trying to figure out where you create that schism to say, yes, you need to be safe, but at the same time assert yourself. But that's so much easier said than done.
Have you ever heard of the trope of the pick me girl?
No, please tell me more.
It's the idea of a girl or a woman who is like, I'm not like the other girls.
Oh, I've heard that.
Oh,
Yeah.
I drink beer, not wine. I wear Converse, not high heels. I'm just
Right.
one of the guys. That's a, I mean, there might be some people out there who actually, that's just their lived reality, but that's by and large a reaction to that disempowerment of, I have identified that aligning with femininity gets me ridiculed by men. It lowers my status in society, so I'm going to align myself with masculinity in order to appeal to the dominant social paradigm, in order to say, like, look, I'm one of you. Can I have a bit of the power? Can I have a bit of what's going on?
I'm going to give you a converse view on that, and it's fascinating to me, and I'm quite bluntly, and for those people who are listening at the end, I'm talking out of my ass right now.
Okay.
But so let's recognize that part of it. But the different view on the same thing could be, I am saying it to other girls, not to other men, because I don't again, I've never had a woman say that to me, mostly because I don't drink. But I see a woman in heels to be actually a very powerful statement. But that's not the point. The point is, let's talk about that trope of, I'm not like other girls. I've usually thought that it was said to either a guy you're dating to say, we can enjoy the same things, or to other women to say, you guys are involved in frivolity and I'm not. So that's the balance. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree,
Yeah.
but I'm not seeing it as a disempowerment thing. But go on, I want to hear more.
Yeah. When we look at the term "not like other girls,"
Yeah.
we are uplifting the person who is not like as the positive, right?
No, I thought of it more as different from, not above, if that makes sense.
And this might be there where we have a different experience, because I have never heard, when I hear "not like other girls," even when we've heard like in Taylor Swift lyrics and things like that,
Yeah.
it's supposed to say, and that's why you should like me.
I can see that part of it.
Which and this is something that from my lived experience, when that term comes up, what we are saying is, I do not align with traditional femininity or these different things, which I know are bad. And I say no, obviously, but
yeah,
what we're doing there, anytime we do that, like, we do it in any community too. In the trans community, we'll do that when we see people who are loud and out there and like protesting with big signs and everything else. Will go like, oh, well, we're not like them, and it's absolutely an assertion of, look, we are aligning with what you believe is better. We're doing the right things. We're doing these different things, and we can put down our own folks. Like, this is something that is taught in femininity, is like, you get ahead by putting down. And obviously we're seeing a shift. We're seeing a shift now where women are starting to lift each other up, but it's
Yeah.
still a situation where in femininity, and something that I'm still unlearning, the idea that you don't get to share the spotlight.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking of my own experience, and maybe this is a illusion of confidence or fake confidence or whatever it is. I don't know yet, because I'm going to say it and then I want you to tell me why I'm wrong, because that's so much more fun. But I'm thinking of, so I'm Indian, obviously. I grew up in India, and one of the things they talk about with Indians is we can handle spice. And when someone comes to me and goes, yeah, I like chicken Alfredo, and I like it over noodles, and I go, I'm not like that. I need spice. I don't think of it as I am less than you. If anything, there's a certain amount of superiority that goes into that idea that I can't believe you can't handle a little bit of spice. Come on. Um, is that so? To me, not like other girls, as translated into this cultural context, is even an air of superiority. I've never thought of it as an air of I'm trying to align with the normal. I'm trying to differentiate from the normal, and I'm trying to play that out a little bit more. So, what is your take? How do you use that?
I think the first thing that I really want to validate is that you have a much more expansive perspective, and it is not the norm. Anyways, the idea that different can equal good is
Yeah,
a beautiful perspective to have, and where we should be culturally operating from. And I think that lives parallel to the understanding that anybody who has tried to step out of the norm has seen what can happen as a result. That
yeah,
we say, like, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
yeah, yeah,
And so when we look at the motivations for someone standing out and being different, I always come from that, like, two perspectives of either the experience of living as they were within the norm was so absolutely other from their lived reality that they were willing to risk being hammered down,
yeah,
or they are attempting to align with the hammer and say, look here, let me stand out, let me help you nail down, let me be part of you. I'm not like these folks, I'm like you. It's the parable of um all the trees voting for the axe because the handle is made of wood. You've heard this.
Ooh, I've never heard that one. That's really good.
It's just when we are stepping outside of, which is something that I am trans, I'm gay, I got tattoos, piercings, I got all sorts of stuff going on. I have stepped firmly outside of the dominant social paradigm. And I've done that in ways that have both been in attempts to align with the dominant social paradigm, because I've felt vulnerable and victimized, and because I was like, maybe this is my refuge. And I've also done it in ways because I desperately need to affirm who I truly am. And I need to
Yeah,
live authentically. And I
yeah,
can tell you that this one, where I was looking for safety and I was attempting to ingratiate myself, was absolutely every single time dependent on me punching down, because it
wow,
comes from a place of identifying parts of myself and my communities and those things, and learning in my brain that they are negative and stepping away from them, versus pursuing what I feel will be joyful and what I feel will be affirming and what I feel is my truth without any negativity, which is why I can look back on my life as a woman and feel so much appreciation and affection there, because I don't believe there's anything inherently bad about being a woman.
right,
But again, this is something that in a lot of different cultures, specifically in my culture from Guam, we had the colonizers coming in and we had people aligning with them and selling out their tribes because they wanted protection. And those people are dead. Um, and we have, in the Jewish communities, have many stories about why we don't try to align with people who try to hurt us. There's beautiful movies. One of my favorite movies sounds like a gimmick, but it's called Tales from the Hood. It's really good. It's a black horror-based vignette films. But the producers and directors talk about, we wanted to make this because we have a really bad view of Black folks who try to align with whiteness to elevate themselves. And all of these ideas of trying to fit into the dominant social paradigm by alienating yourself from yourself. At least in my experience, I don't know of a situation in which that succeeds, because eventually you're still the other, or where you're actually living happily. Because I don't know how we can strip away parts of ourselves and still feel like we're living in our fullness.
Before we go, Kato,
Yeah.
it is Pride Month. How can people reach you to talk to you, not just during Pride Month, but at other times to engage you, and what can you help them with?
Yeah, so I do catalytic consulting, which is I just connect with folks in the nonprofit space, in the small business space, consultants, entrepreneurs, and help to channel all of that vital energy into projects and systems that actually work for us. I work a lot specifically with the queer community as well. And that is something that I'm doing throughout Pride Month and into other months as well. But specifically during Pride Month, I'll have a little bit more information forthcoming later, but I will be speaking with the YMCA of Delaware on the importance of pronouns and how they carry significance whether you are trans or not. So you can learn a little bit more about that at katolujancamacho.com. So you see my name down there, KATOLUJANCAMACHO.com.
Thank you again, Kato.
Awesome. Thank you.